And we had some technical issues with one of our virtual presenters. And so what we're going to do is try to make up for that. We're going to try to grab a hold of that missed conversation and have the conversation. It's going to be great around digital storytelling with our folks at Kenyon College. We have some other participants who are here with us today. I'm going to let everybody do a round of introductions, and I'll just call people out by name, and then we can just get started with the presentation, and then we'll transition into more of a conversational. So can I ask Beth to get started?
Yes, hi, I'm Beth Seltzer. I'm calling from Bryn Mawr College.
Thanks, Beth. Chris? Oh, Chris, you need to unmute.
Sorry. Sorry. I am Chris Boyland, and I'm also from Bryn Mawr College.
Welcome. Greg?
Hi, this is Greg Dillon. I'm an instructional designer from the Boston area. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to end with our, we actually have two presenter guests with us today. Micah, I believe this is actually your class. It was your class that Daniel was in when he was building these projects, right?
Yeah, Micah Myers, Kenyon College.
Wonderful, wonderful. And of course, our presenters there at Kenyon as well. Go ahead and introduce yourselves and we can get started.
I'm Joe Murphy.
I'm Daniel Oliveri.
The presentation, which I'll just give a real short synopsis on, is about how we've started a digital storytelling initiative at Kenyon, which is designed to try to get faculty members to provide incentives and, more importantly, some structure and support for faculty members to learn about different forms of experimenting with narrative in new media, and to implement that in some of their courses or even in their own research. We're taking a very broad approach to this. Now, practically what we've seen looks a lot like what I think of as classical digital storytelling. It's very much a lot of short movies. Certainly less than 10 minutes, usually less than 4. Most of ours are really in service of taking academic research and distilling it down and making it compelling for a popular audience. And we've got some neat examples on that. Certainly in the Q&A, we could talk about some of the different ways that that's been implemented. We're also looking at things like podcasting as a storytelling form that classes can pursue. And we've done a little bit with websites which have a narrative structure. There are also lots of good website projects, and have been for an awfully long time, which are more about collecting information and kind of presenting it, but not necessarily with a narrative form. But we've started to explore some of those as well. And that's where today's example would come in. I told you I condensed it as far as I could. Mm-hmm. So mapping ancient texts, I should probably throw over to Micah and Daniel, but it's a project, Micah's project, to create a web interactive interface which allows the visualization of the travel literature of the ancient world. So the literature that exists about people moving in space and time, which proceeds to tell us all kinds of interesting things about the relative prominence of different locations and that prominence over time, and allows us to go from there. And I will stop blabbering about something I don't understand as well as the other two people on the call.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to start out with one night. It was probably like maybe 2 in the morning, maybe 1. I was at a hostel in Edinburgh in the lobby because I didn't want to bother anyone in my room working on this project. There was someone a few feet away from me. I think she was getting broken up with over the phone. She was speaking in a language I didn't understand. But why I start with this is that sort of moment sort of shows a lot about my particular involvement with digital storytelling at Kenyon, because for me, I actually was never in a class with Professor Myers. I was actually very lucky. I was hired to do this work, and I was actually, I think, offered the job freshman year because I had Professor Myers as my advisor, and he said, "Oh, you work with JavaScript. I'd love to have you." And I thought, getting paid to code, wow, heck no. No way, that's terrifying. the idea of being paid to do something that I don't know I can do is just not something I want to be involved with. But I did attend meetings. I did learn everything I had to know to possibly do this job in the future. And I think it was after winter break sophomore year, I came back to Kenyon, didn't have any work yet. And I thought, I might have a solution for some of the problems that they're having with this website, this mapping website. And I stayed at the library until it closed. It was the lights went dark before I left the building. I was having really a lot of fun solving this problem. But actually, it did work out. I sent it over, and I realized then, if I'm doing this for free, then probably I'm good enough at this point that I can actually do the job. And what's really important about that is I was given the opportunity to take on this responsibility. And while it took me a while to get there, I eventually felt I was able to take this job. And so sort of the lesson there, I think, is if people have even a beginning of an aptitude or are starting to learn, I would very much encourage that. Give them the chance to take on responsibility, which goes back to Edinburgh, because I was up in the middle of the night because you were having trouble with an SQL related problem. I remember you mentioned you asked your wife for help
Yes.
with the SQL. And I was like, whoa, I'd like free help with SQL. I should get married, That's clearly the solution.
That is not consistently how it works.
Apparently not, yeah.
It can, but
it depends who you marry, I guess.
it might.
And so I think that this has been a really valuable experience for me, probably largely because it's very unacademic, a very different situation, both because the massive amounts that Professor Myers and Mr. Murphy know, and also the stuff they don't know. No offense.
No, none taken. That's why you're here. If I could do this without you, you wouldn't.
Yeah, well, thank you, I guess. But to start with that first one, I remember being in a meeting, and I think you mentioned that the reason there are dotted lines on this map rather than solid lines is to show that we're not really sure exactly how the people traveled. We don't have the precise data of where they moved, and that those dotted lines were like a slight attempt to show that. And that it really impressed me and sort of astounded me that where people were thinking on that level, were using sort of every avenue available to them in this website to get their point across and to tell the story, as accurately as possible. And so it was really cool to work with people who thought that fully. But then on the other side, also super valuable, is the really rare and very important experience of working with people who are established or much older than you, who are clearly really smart, not as them being your professor who are going to solve all your problems, but people who are together with you on your team, trying to tell the story or get this information out there. And so, one example of that, at one point, I was getting this data saying that Cicero was sending letters like 200 years after he died, about. And so there were one of two possibilities. One, we had a zombie Cicero who was rising from the dead and sending letters, or we had a problem with our data. It turned out to be the second one. But what's really cool is that I have Professor Myers, Mr. Murphy, who I can email about this, and they won't come back with, oh, okay, here's the solution, boom, I'm the professor, you're the student, this is solved. It's more of a, oh, wow, zombie Cicero, how do I deal with this? It's a collaboration, which I feel very, very lucky to be a part of. And I think that sort of element of respecting, really working with people who are younger than you, who are still very much figuring out, what they have to offer. I think that's really cool, especially in this sort of digital space, and working with technology. And now switching over to sort of the meat of the matter, the presentation I have for you.
So actually, go ahead and do this window.
This window?
Yeah.
You share?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
And then we can switch that.
Fantastic. So this is the map we've been talking about.
Did that work, folks? Just because we're looking at the map right now.
Can people see a map?
It looks good to me.
Fantastic. So you can see the dotted lines I talked about. You can see in the top, you can select from different options. That's actually what I worked on that one day back from break in the library. So this is the end result. This is hopefully what's going to help people understand better about the ancient world. And this is sort of a little bit what I have to deal with, all the problems behind the scenes. So it starts out with data. These students in Professor Meyer's classes, or Professor Myers himself, create these sheets of data. And I thank them so much, because this looks like a lot of work. I'm glad that usually I don't have to do it myself. So I get this, and then I turn it into this with a site called Cardo. If you're interested in this website and its possibilities, let me know. I'd love to talk to you about it, email you about it also. But in order to take this map and sort of make it into that map, it takes code, and that's sort of where I come in. This is sort of my daily, grind. This is what I'm looking at. This is what I was looking at 5 minutes before this presentation of how do we take this data and we turn it into a website. And now what I've been really lucky this summer to be able to do is I actually got a digital storytelling grant where I could sort of take this project, this mapping ancient texts, a step further. Rather than just, like representing data, as important as it is, I wanted to tell a specific story. And the story I chose was the Second Punic War, because there's a lot of fun stuff going on. We've got elephants, we've got Archimedes, and importantly, we've got a lot of travel, as you can see here. There's, people moving all across the globe, or at least across the Mediterranean. And I think it's really important to be able to tell stories in new ways, because a lot of the time, people on the internet, they're writing articles or longer pieces, maybe ebooks. And while that's great, it's not exactly using the form of the internet to its full extent whatsoever. People are making websites that don't know that they're websites. And to sort of explain what I mean by that, if I can unscreen share for a second. Cool. I actually brought along a shirt, and so this is a shirt, the Great Wave. But I would say this is a shirt that does not know that it's a shirt. This shirt thinks that it's a poster because it's using that rectangular structure. It's not not sort of using the form that's available to it. And I would argue that's exactly what people are doing with the internet. They're not using everything that's at their disposal to tell the story in a way that can only be told on a website. And that's sort of what we're trying to move towards with mapping ancient texts, with this project this summer. And I'm excited to see where it goes, to do things that haven't been done before. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the conversation part of the conversation.
That was great. Thank you so much. I do want to mention, just as we start to open things up for conversation, that I have linked to the Mapping Ancient Texts website, as well as the website that that Daniel's working on this summer in the blog post.
Oh, thanks. Mike, is there anything that you heard us saying about your project and wanted to either expand on or correct?
I think that Daniel did a nice job talking about the team project, and I'm very excited that he's found a narrative that he's interested in working on. For me, this project comes out of a broader interest in the representation of travel in literature from the ancient Mediterranean, and the desire to think about different ways that data visualization could make evident new aspects of that. So in the case of the Second Punic War, this is something that Daniel arrived upon out of his own interest as a story to tell, and he's finding interesting ways to not just replicate the interface that we've been developing, but to develop a new one that fits the specific narrative around the Carthaginian general Hannibal, that he's very interested in, one of the most famous figures from the ancient world. And so it's really about that bringing together of text and place by using digital visualization that I'm most interested in this project.
It really is fascinating stuff. As we start to open things up for conversation, we do actually have two people. Oh, I didn't realize Micah had to leave. I knew he had to leave, but yeah, I wonder if he had dropped out there, or maybe he'll come back. But we do have two people who there he is. He's back. Hi, Micah.
That was not the mute button.
That was not the mute button. We do have two people who have joined us since we did introductions, so I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, and if you guys do have questions, you can feel free to jump in there. Let's start off with Chrissy. Chrissy, would you introduce yourself real quick? And I know you have a great interest in digital mapping. Maybe you have a question.
Sure, and thank you. I do have to leave real soon too, so maybe I'll throw my question in right away. I'm Chrissy Lukens, Director of Academic Technology from St. Norbert College. Your work is awesome. I love everything with digital storytelling through maps, story maps. I have a real passion for that. And I've heard of Carto. I haven't used it before. So I guess a quick question I have for you, I was poking around on it a little bit. With the programming that you have to do on the back end, is it an easy tool to jump into or to have other students jump into, or is the learning curve for that one a little bit higher compared to some of the others?
So Daniel referred to the fact that some of this data is collected by students in Micah's class, where I actually owe Micah some work on some documentation that we found in the spring iteration, where I think we can smooth out that learning curve a little bit. But by and large, I'll say the students were successful, that they could be given this task of read the text, identify the places, go to the gazetteers and find information about the places, write down names and URLs and dates, and make a map out of it. And I think, so I think that it is possible to jump in and get moving at a speed faster than we've had with some of the competitors. And on the flip side, substantially slower than you'd have with something like a Google Map, that it's complex enough. And then what Daniel's doing has a lot to do with getting maps that are more customizable, differently, interactive in the way that Carto is not interactive out of the box, embedded in other web hosting. So that's where a lot of that complexity is coming from.
If I can add on to that, to talk about specifically the back end and the JavaScript side that not those students were necessarily involved in, I would say it took a long time for me, but part of that was I was just learning JavaScript itself to some extent. I would honestly, if you're looking into having students use this, I would love to try and write something up to help the next person figure it out much faster. It now feels pretty reasonable to get something up and running. And really does not require that many lines of code at all, but some of it can be very daunting. And I would not be surprised if new people who are new to developing, new to JavaScript would struggle or be a bit intimidated. I'd love to help if you ever were interested in that.
Awesome, thank you. You gave me a new tool to poke around with. I'll be doing that. Thanks. Off to you, Chuck.
Oh, I suppose. Hi, I'm Chuck Pearson. I'm Associate Professor of Natural Science at Tusculum College, Greenville, Tennessee. I have no big fancy question. I just was here for the presentation at T3, and I wanted to make sure I heard Daniel give his part.
Thank you so much.
I find myself actually reminded a little bit of your presentation at T3, Chuck, where you were talking about virtual labs and then recreating them with actual physical labs for distance ed students. Just in this idea of how do we make something that's available and interactive and sparks, creativity and curiosity. I think there's a lot of overlap, even though those might not necessarily be stories, although the examples you showed kind of were imposing a story onto a physical.
Well, I think one of the things I actually owe Brittany Brown O'Donnell a great deal of credit for this type of thinking is the thought process of science as narrative. How we actually can take how we know what we know in science, how we do science work, and stitch together different observations to make a broader story. The real benefit of a digital storytelling mentality in that context is allowing students to draw together and see how their different observation weaves into one grander narrative. Now, I'm not going to say I've got that circle squared just yet. I'm not even close. It's very much what Daniel said earlier. There are a lot of things we do with the internet that that are just using the internet as, hey, we have this means to serve something to a whole lot of students independently really quick, and we miss the whole point that this really is here to network. And we can stitch our stories together.
I just wanted to follow up, if I may, on Chrissy's point to the story map, which is something that we looked at, I recall, Joe, earlier on in the project. And I think that the strength of story map is that the progression of a single narrative. In the larger project, I'm interested in being able to look at when we have one narrative pass through a given place, say Rome, to be able to see what other narratives also pass through that, and then also to filter it by genre, by language, by date. So it's these sorts of Carto and the customizations that Daniel has been working on in Carto allow us to explore multiple narratives at once, and the user to theoretically jump between different narratives at points that they are interested in. So you could say, what are all the Greek prose texts from the 1st century CE to the 5th century CE that refer to Athens, and see them all at once and see where else they go.
Yeah, that was actually that was a neat project at Iliads, which actually the most recent version of Iliads just wrapped up. But we were able to get a lot of value out of that, Mike and myself, and another one of my colleagues and a student assistant who was attached to the project earlier were able to do some good work in just taking a week to really rapidly prototype and say how hard will this be to get where we want it to be, and that's how we ended up basically jettisoning ArcGIS and moving over to Carto. Other thoughts or questions?
I had a question, actually. It was about, so you kind of set up in your talk, you set up a sort of a dichotomy between the work that you would do as a student in a class and the work that you do in the sort of collaborative working with a faculty member to do this project more on a sort of equal footing. And I was really struck by that contrast. And I was wondering, do you think, could we sort of speculate on ways that a classroom situation could feel more like this job, or does it have to be, this is like something that just exists in kind of internship situations, or is this something that is a kind of useful pedagogical tool that we could bring in more broadly across the curriculum? Nice small question. Sorry.
A really good question. I think if you're working together, if you have a project, if rather than assigning a student or a group of students a project, if you can put yourself in situations where you assign yourself a project almost, including the students, and where you really want to get something done, you're invested and you sort of require the students to some degree to get their work done in order for you to also get the outcome that you want. Well, obviously there are problems there if students don't come through for whatever reason. I think that creates, or has the potential to create, that really cool dynamic of working together on a more equal ground with your professor, and doing things that that sort of rely on each student or different students for their particular skill sets. I remember one of my my English teacher in high school would say that she felt amazing in college when the professor would call on like, hey, you know Greek, what does this translate to? Or like, another language, or you're really great with Faulkner or whatever. If you know your students' strengths and you can bring them in, which I'm sure people are already very familiar with, then that's going to feel amazing to the student. Allow them to see that they have things of value that they can contribute to people who are much more advanced than them.
I think I'm sorry that we just lost Micah, because I think it's interesting to compare Daniel's experience with the experience of the students in the travel literature class that he teaches, where I think there is a real opportunity, and some of the students are clearly seeing it, in that they're not doing a recyclable assignment. In some ways, the next group of students can't do the assignment. We actually had to make a data structure to allow that to be so. Because nobody's particularly interested in getting a second or third or fourth map of Cicero's first 50 letters. So I think it's interesting that he has found a way in a classroom to say, this matters to me. You're going to create data that I'm going to integrate in my scholarly arguments, and we're going to serve out to the world to help other people understand this literature better. I think that's hugely valuable. From watching the ways that some of those teams interact, as with any class, so he split the students this spring into teams of 2. And, you can tell that some of them were more collaborative than others. I was actually outstandingly pleased when a student actually caught me after a campus concert, completely just on our off time, to say, hey, remember that thing you taught me how to fix? Well, one of my friends was having the same problem and I taught them how to fix it. I'm like, yes! This is why I do this job. But, I was able to see that there were some teams that were working in a collaborative model, and some that were at least in the interaction with me, one person was clearly doing more of the typing and taking more of the lead. So I think there are all the problems that you run into with kind of class group projects in that mode. And it's still not really a collaborative event. There's still the classroom dynamic at play there.
Oh, also people from Bryn Mawr. I'm actually from Narberth, just a few towns over. Other questions?
Yay, connections. That's very cool. Yeah, do we have any other comments or questions?
I actually have a question for Joe, if you don't mind. Sure. Joe, you had started us off by talking about the digital storytelling initiative at Kenyon and mentioned that it takes several different forms, narrative web pages, podcasts, and more video narratives. My question for you is that, for me, I think data visualization has obvious narrative potential that I think we're just beginning to discover. Obviously, video narrative has existed for a long time. I'm kind of curious about some of your podcasting exercises and the extent to which, without that visual information, you see the narratives changing or communicating differently.
Well, that's a fascinating question. To be honest, I feel like we're just scratching the surface of that. I think a lot of what we're working on is trying to so I guess I find 2 ways. One is to figure out ways where things that are really awfully close to interview podcasts, or Kenyon has a lot of oral history activity going on right now, and has actually for quite a while. We should respect the history there. And one thing that we're looking at is how what we've got are platforms that kind of where the platform itself is not necessarily telling a story, but where we're using the individual episodes to make stories accessible that otherwise weren't. We're also moving folks towards a better understanding of writing for audio. And honestly, in the projects that I've looked at, we're still very much working on kind of fundamental rhetorical skills of that's a great sentence for your paper and it needs like 3 periods before it can be on a podcast. You need to talk slower. You need to equalize your audio. One of the big bugaboos. It's the video version of the would you just use the tripod problem that we have with in video it's use the darn tripod. It's in audio it's all of your tracks should be about the same volume level. Don't fix the audio of that interview where the speaker's standing away from the mic. So we're really working pretty much on that level. We have not, I think we've dealt with it more on the other side. With video, you can have a more explicit conversation of they can see this. Therefore, you can take it out of your sentence. I don't feel like we've really crossed that bridge either in terms of you're communicating this with your expressiveness in your voice, or even, we could layer in environmental sound to communicate some of these things. That would be the next level we'd like to get to. So I guess one thing that we didn't talk about in terms of the way the initiative is currently going, and I had a nice little slide in the presentation about you should boo me if I become the hey, we got a grant guy. But we do have funds available to support faculty members in projects. A big chunk of what we've been able to do is in providing some patch-through funding to allow us to make a hire so that we've got somebody available to really provide very dedicated support to this kind of project, whether they're receiving grant money or not. Actually, we've had a lot of interest in people who just want to do the project, which is very rewarding. And we've started spending money on if this is something that's interesting, we've got a kind of an equipment list that we're happy to share where we found some digital cameras and microphones that we're particularly happy with. And being able to get that kind of equipment in people's hands has made a difference. And then we've got the funds for the position that Daniel's in this summer, where students are able to campus work in tight collaboration on a particular scholarly project with their with a faculty mentor. And then actually the way that that's defined, it's supposed to be an extension of the faculty members' research. So it's a little different than some of the summer scholar projects we've got, which sometimes are more, provide more opportunity for a student to really pick their own project. And that gets into a whole undergraduate research conversation. But this one, we're looking for ways where we've been very explicit about the student also amplifying the reach of the faculty members' research to a broader public.
It's fascinating stuff. I do love listening to narrative podcasts.
Yes. So I will say one of the things that we've had a lot of fun and a little success with on that is getting students to record intros and outros, which just creates an understanding for them that we're going to make a piece. First of all, it's a nice little hands-on exercise, but we're going to make the piece of audio that everyone is going to have at the beginning and end of their podcast, just to get them thinking, again, that this is part of a series, and I've got some responsibility to the other people in this class as we make something together, even if fundamentally my team is making my personal one little episode, which is something we've tried to do to communicate a broader structure.
And what classes does this usually take place in?
So we have hit all across the curriculum. I would say that an awful lot of our interest right now is coming out of, we got some very active folks in English. We've got a wonderful example at scriptohio.kenyancip.org, which is about, it's a project which intends to be ongoing about presenting the culture work around Ohio authors. But we've had a fair amount of interest in anthropology and sociology. We also had a really neat collaboration between one of our chemists and the local Board of Health, who put together kind of a curriculum on drug use and specifically the chemical interactions inside the body. That project got big. Honestly, that one took we chose a route that took a lot of effort, but I think the students also, the students report feeling that they were pushed in very interesting and useful ways. And we've got examples of storytelling around videos targeted basically towards middle schoolers about, no, this is seriously what nicotine does when you put it in your blood. So that was, and talking about chemical receptors and addiction. So there's some neat examples there. We've had some in modern language classes. So this was one of our goals, to get some of this, both to get some of these tools spread outside and across the curriculum as new media tools that we are all going to be working in. And also to a certain extent to get some of the responsibility for supporting those folks off of the backs of the folks in the fine arts who do it professionally and did not sign up to be support folks for Kenyon, but get approached to a lot because, hey, you're the person who knows how to use a camera. So I think that's another, that seems to be working, that people are coming to us and hopefully giving them a little rest so they can pursue their own creative endeavors.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please, Greg.
Cool. When you are looking for students to participate in this project, how do you introduce it to faculty members? How do you kind of talk about how it will benefit students or why they should have their students participating?
In the digital storytelling issues generally?
Right.
I think so one thing that's happening right now, I think in part because Kenyon's also got a big interest in community engaged learning, and that initiative has been very powerful. So I think that's forcing some discussion around how communities represent themselves and how we have, again, coming from the anthropological and sociological sides, what kind of responsibilities do we have when we represent another community? When we help them represent themselves to themselves. I think we're also in a cultural moment, particularly acutely in the natural sciences, where there's a lot of interest in science writing. But I think we're in a cultural moment right now where there's a lot of interest, at least on this campus, in how we represent what scholars do and the relevance of scholarship outside the academy. So I think there's a lot right now that comes to these conversations about learning to communicate to multiple audiences. And that's really what a lot of this is. It's just trying to figure out it's trying to think about audience. It's a core rhetorical skill, but we now have some really interesting venues to do it in and skills to do it with. A lot of people do say, I would like my students to have profile pieces. I'd like my student to be able to go out looking for an internship or a job and say, this is a thing I made. And it's only going to take you a minute to watch, 2 minutes to watch it. Browse the website for 5 minutes and you can see what I can do, as opposed to please sit with my 20-page paper. So I think that is in play, that the ability of these to be portfolio pieces is in play as well. And honestly, some folks are just looking to shake things up a little bit. And I think recognizing the power of giving the student, even if it's not a professional profile piece, the thing where, on break, grandma says, what did you do at college? And you say, well, I made this thing. And I think that's something that faculty members are seeing as motivating. I think some faculty members are using it to teach teamwork. Others are doing very individually focused things. But for example, that Script Ohio project was very teamwork heavy, and actually I think so this is one of my hobby horses. Students hate teamwork because we don't teach them how to do it well. And I think she did a great job of saying, here's the structure, you have to hit these guidelines. I'm not going to tell you how to divide the work, but you have to divide it up. That was also a really big project. And then we've had other ones that are substantially smaller and probably don't hit the same marks because it's because they're focused on different things.
I can support one thing that you said right there, Joe, in that we are having a moment in the natural sciences where we're recognizing that there's a whole lot of sophistication, either apparent or real, in what we do, and we need to communicate it better to the public if we are going to have the impact we need to have. One of the most powerful things of the project you guys did, your chemistry and filmmaking, presenting information to middle schoolers, is even as that stretched your students, it got that fundamental importance of we need to take this information that's received as technical by the outside world and communicate it in a fashion that's understandable, and not just understandable to random adults in a community, but understandable to a middle grades population. That's those are things we really have not historically done well in the sciences. We've not historically taught our students at the undergraduate level that, yes, this is really an important part of what you're going to be taking with you from that undergraduate degree. So this is a really powerful thing that you guys are working on.
Thank you. Chuck, did I get you the links to those? Because I know you asked me for them.
I don't think you did.
Okay.
Then again, my brain's 9 ways from Sunday right now. So just assume you didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I did, then send them again and we'll both be surprised.
Thank you.
I'm really interested in this idea of the using a web page or using a website or using the internet, as it's, for all of the different features that it allows us. And I loved your metaphor, Daniel. The shirt doesn't think it's a shirt; it thinks it's a poster. I love that. So I want to throw this question maybe first to Daniel, but if others want to chime in too, what does it look like? What does it look like when a web page is being a website?
Great question. For one thing, the map is be able to use maps is a really fun thing, because that's, I would say, like very visually interesting and really gets your attention, brings you right in. But there are a lot of things that websites can do to really bring you right in and keep your focus. There are like graphs. I know that Nate Silver gave the commencement address at Kenyon, and his website does a fantastic job of keeping you interested with all sorts of stuff going on without being too cluttered. I know in Tanzania there's a new news source that they call it like a data news source. Every one of their articles is going to have one of these either a map or some sort of graph, something that is using that format. And graphs don't just have to be static. You can mouse over and sort of maybe see a description of each different bar. And then on top of that, like anyone who goes to Kenyon, I'm aware of David Foster Wallace, and he is known for his footnotes. Well, now you don't have to jump to the bottom of the page, the end of the article. You can hopefully scroll right over, and a pop-up box can come up to explain whatever it is. And a really sort of an odd one, but one that's fun for me. I've actually started sort of writing essays and just putting them embedding them in the source code of the website. So if there's someone who's really digging around, then they can get my essay, my personal essay of, hey, this is what I was doing while I was working on this website. And to me, that's really cool, because it's giving that extra level. It's showing that you really cared about this, and allowing that power user to have like sort of a secret that they can find. Other really valuable things are being able to let people comment in a meaningful way, being able to connect more people to it. And what I would say is cooler than any of these things, in my opinion, is sort of going back to that idea of telling stories like with video. Like if you know Humans of New York, I am a religious zealot for Humans of New York, because in addition to all these cool bells and whistles that I love, the internet also has the ability to just show us to us, to get a lot of people's stories out there. And to me, that's sort of cooler than all the different maps or little things you can do with the websites.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would include, I love what you just said, that code documentation is fundamentally telling the story of how I built this.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. The one thing that I would include is a little bit of hypertextuality, that a document knows it's on the web when it's literally connected to another one. And I think one of our very long-term goals for this project would be that people should be able to, right now you can read textual snippets. You can see little bits of, here's how we know that a point goes here because here's the quote from Cicero where he says, I'm coming to Brindisi, and I'll see you soon. In an ideal world, we'd actually have an interface that allowed us to jump straight to the full text, and you could, something that would more tightly tie the map to the entire text that we're working from. And it's nice working with a classicist because that's possible. I mean, translations also have their own copyright issues, but at least we know Cicero's lawyers aren't coming for us. I think that's in this, that would be the example, but I think in our other examples, I would like to see these projects more tied to things outside the project to say, here's how to learn more and not necessarily from me.
Well said.
Other thoughts? How does a document know it's on the web?
Also, I mean, just on a more practical level, it can link, like you were saying, it can, I don't know, get you more followers, more people, more awareness of who you are. If you really want to get your face out there and generate interest in more of your projects, then it can be great to say, oh, hey, this is who I am. Come see my blog and read more of my stuff. That's very valuable, because that'd be harder to do with go to the library and then find another one of my books, or get another newspaper, read another one of my articles. You can get there instantaneously.
I just had an interesting thought when you brought up all the footnotes with David Foster Wallace. I wonder if that method of taking so many footnotes and having that much metadata is almost like more static text, imagining that it is a website.
Yeah, people have talked about that. Yeah, my dad is a huge Infinite Jest fan. We actually, oh man, we went to the David Foster Wallace conference. But people talk about that. Yeah, about how it's sort of, the beginning of the internet seems connected to that. But yeah, exactly.
Form and format, very interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
Yeah. I have a kind of just sort of playing off that idea. So I know when we get faculty or students who are interested in doing projects, they often come in already knowing the genre that's going to make the most sense. So they'll come in saying, I think this makes sense as a video project. I think that makes sense as a podcast or a website. And I think that's great. But just listening to this conversation, I'm wondering if there would be an advantage, maybe not for all projects, but for some projects, to really like experiment more with the same information in different formats. So saying, could this, okay, so we have this data project, it makes sense as this interactive website, but what would it mean to do that as a podcast, or what would it mean to do a podcast as data, or things like that? I don't know. It's more of a passing thought than an actual question.
A really neat one.
Joe, do you guys ever do that kind of work with your, I know you have like a digital storytelling event every year, don't you? Does that kind of stuff work out in there?
So we do a faculty digital storytelling institute every summer. We actually just got through ours a week ago. We haven't built one that way yet. Ask me next year, because now I'm kind of interested in that. In working with those, in those faculty institutes, there's a lot of work that has to go into finding the right balance of hands-on and theoretical, and usually it works better. I think some interesting group dynamics happen the more similar things are, and as you add diversity to it, the dynamic changes. Now, actually, last year we did have something like 7 or 8 people making movies, and one person who made this fascinating interactive story that was designed as a poetry prompt generator. on Twine. And unfortunately, we never really captured the last step that he wanted to get to. You know, at the same time that we were able to say this is a fascinating project, and I'm so glad that we got there. It certainly changed things compared to the emotional impact that can happen when everybody's working on the same level of story. But that said, I mean, I think you've posed now a really interesting challenge for next year's workshop about whether we might want to find a way where people can still feel like they got enough time to make something really meaningful and had maybe more choice than saying you need to make a 3-minute movie.
So jumping quickly back to Beth's comment about, you know, changing format. If you're interested in this, there's a really incredible writer, probably already know her, Jennifer Egan. She won the Pulitzer Prize for A Visit from the Goon Squad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe her publicist or someone said, hey, we should have a website that sort of supports this and plays along with this. And she helped people create this website that worked along with it. She's also written a novel on Twitter. So she's really on the cutting edge with doing, really playing with these other forms. Also, a chapter in that book is written in the form of a PowerPoint, which you can go on and see, online and see. And she has it up there for free. So the literary world is starting to engage and do some fun stuff with it. Yeah, definitely, I would say worth checking out.
Cool. Very cool stuff. Do we have any final thoughts, questions, comments?
Only thank you so much. Thank you, Autumn, for making this happen. Thank you, Daniel, for being available. I felt terrible when we were not able to get your audio to work.
Well, thank you so much for listening.
I'm glad that we had an opportunity.
Thanks. Yeah, from the point of view of a conference organizer, do not put someone who has a virtual presenter right after the keynote when you're switching rooms and you know everybody's going to be pressed for time. I'm not sure if we could have worked it out if we had more time, but that was I feel bad for that as well. But I do think that this helps to make the presentation a little bit more rich. We can also embed this on the Sketch with your profile for the event. And I was really glad that we got to have Chrissy and Chuck here because they were both in the room for the presentation. So so I think that this has been a good success. I'm really excited. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. If anybody wants to stick around afterwards just to, you know, kind of say goodbye, that's all right. But I'm going to stop the broadcast. So thank you if anybody's viewing this either now or in the future. Bye.